Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome back to College Knowledge. I'm Dave Kozak, alongside my co-host, the legendary Mr. Joe Kerns.
Also known as Joe the College Pro.
That's it.
Dave the CEO.
I'm very excited about today's show.
Me too.
This is a subject matter that we have not covered, but man, do we get questions about it. And we've done our research. We know a thing or two, but our guest is an absolute expert. And today we're going to be talking about transferring colleges as well as the progression from community college to a four-year degree and how all that works. Jaime Smith is our guest. She's the author of The Complete Guide to College Transfer. She's a certified education planner with 25 years of experience in education at the middle school, high school, and college levels. As an advisor, she specializes in transfer admissions, homeschoolers, neurodiverse learners, and other non-traditional students. She's got a wealth of information to share with us about transferring and understanding what goes into it. So without further ado, Jaime, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
So let's start, as we always do with all of our guests. How did we end up here? Give me the steps. Give me your experience that got you to this.
Yeah, like you said in my bio, I've been in education for a long time on a lot of different levels, and I gravitate toward the students who are taking a non-traditional path, finding their own way to higher ed. And for my own daughter, when she was ready to go to college, community college was the right choice, absolutely, for her. And I discovered that it was both an amazing pathway to save money, to get a great education, to have smaller classes, also an incredibly difficult pathway to pursue if you didn't know how you were getting to that 4-year. And she was lucky because she had me behind the scenes. I'm looking things up. I'm figuring out policies. I'm telling her, oh, take this, not that. And I thought, what about all those students who don't have that behind them? So here I am 10 years later, writing a book to try to get more knowledge out there because there just isn't enough information out there about the transfer process. And when you get into 4-year to 4-year transfers, then it's all so nuanced and really depends on the university you're leaving and the university you're trying to go to. So there's just a lot of detailed information that isn't readily available in one place for students.
And in line with our podcast, College Knowledge, what we're trying to do is the same thing you're doing, is bring information to people, right? First of all, it's an insane game and architecture and time sequence and process, but people sort of go into it, I don't want to say ignorant, but without doing the research necessary. I think that's the key. And we've talked to many other guests in the sort of admissions knowledge base that say the one thing I would tell everybody is just do your research, just get involved earlier and think about it as though it is a massive investment, because it is. So there's one piece of information that you put out to me prior to the show that I think is tremendous. And I want to kick it off here because I don't think everybody realizes what type of problem transferring or 2-year to 4-year conversion is, but the statistic is that there's more than 40 million Americans holding some college credit, but no degree. And it could be because of complexity. It could be because of finance. It could be because they didn't have the plan or the pathway. What is your take, and why do you think it exists in that manner?
That is a staggering number. You know, when I realized that, I just thought, oh my gosh, there are so many people out there who probably want to finish a degree if only they knew how, if only it were convenient enough and fit into their schedules and was affordable, you know, but there are just so many barriers to students. And I think the big thing for those students, the 40 million who are wishing they could get back to degrees, and the kids at a community college thinking they're wanting to transfer. The big thing is the credits, the classes, how they align. And it's kind of the Wild West out there. Every university has their own policy about how credits will transfer, which ones count, which ones don't. Sometimes they'll say, sure, we'll take all your credits, but they're going to take them all as electives. They don't see them as lining up to their exact classes. And so then a student gets a degree plan and they see that they've been set back a semester, a year more. And that's really devastating. And I think, students really need to do the research ahead of time to find out where the friendly colleges are who are going to dig into their credits. They can advocate for themselves and they can appeal those transfer credit reports and ask for a second look, just the way we would tell them to appeal a financial aid decision if it didn't match their real financial circumstances. They can also appeal those transfer credit reports and say, hey, I think you overlooked some valuable credits that I have. So I think there are just a lot of students out there thinking, oh, I'll just show up with all of my credits from an accredited college and it'll be fine. And it's actually way more complex than that.
I can extrapolate even further to the advanced placement credits and the dual enrollment credit that people get. And people get, well, I've got 17 college credits coming out of high school and whoops, my school didn't care at all. And it's not to tell people not to take those advanced classes and not to do that. Just understand how they impact whatever the next step is in your college or your education journey.
I had a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned like you can appeal a financial award, right? So you can apply to a bunch of schools, here's the offers. In the transfer world, can you see what they would accept and what they count and for what before you actually commit like you would do with a financial offer?
Hopefully.
All right.
The answer often with transfer is it depends. It depends on the school. The schools that I typically recommend and tell kids to look at that are, in my opinion, transfer friendly, they'll give you an admissions decision, a financial aid award, and a transfer credit report all within a couple of days so that students can make an informed decision because they need to know what it's going to cost. And then with the transfer credit report, how long they're going to be there because that cost is good for 1 year. Are you going to multiply that by 2 or 3 or 4? That's a huge difference. Not all colleges are forthcoming with that information right away, though. A lot of universities want to send the information to someone on the faculty or to multiple departments. Maybe they'll say the physics department has to look at this and the chemistry department looks at that and anthropology is over there, and they'll disperse all of the information and wait for faculty to say if this lines up with their courses or not. And that can take time. So there are some students who are choosing blindly and then they get to the school and then they find out how things transferred. And then on the total opposite side, there are some colleges that have tools online where you can look up your classes in advance or you can ask them for a pre-read of your transcript to find out what it would look like. So there's everything from like finding out before you apply to finding out when you're a semester into the new school.
It's fascinating. So we deal a lot in the college finance world and trying to make sure people don't overpay and they understand financial aid and they understand financial aid awards. And I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse or not, but I'm going to ask it anyway because, again, I'm curious. We spend a large portion of our spring helping families craft appeal letters if they're warranted and if the need wasn't met, whatever it may be. How common is it to appeal and can you appeal financial aid on a transfer basis?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the same process. You would go through the letter and finding your documentation and everything. The only difference is that sometimes universities are not as forthcoming with aid, whether it's merit or need-based. I would say for the most part, need-based is similar. There are some universities that promise covering 100% need for first years, but they don't cover 100% for transfers, but that's an anomaly. The merit aid is where things are really different. A lot of universities don't offer merit aid for transfers or they offer a smaller amount. And again, that's where I say, look for the transfer-friendly universities who wants you as a transfer student. They might show you that they want you with the merit aid.
Yeah. And is that when you say transfer friendly, I guess what would go through my mind is that if I had to guess, there are schools that maybe their retention rate is not the best, where they had 100 seats freshman class and 75 come back for year 2. And it's a typical recurring that, hey, they got a 75% retention rate. So they know they're losing seats that they were planning on from a budget perspective. Having some of those students pay for another 3 years versus you have a school that has 100 and they have 96 kids come back out of 100. Like they don't accept as many. So when you say transfer school, is that kind of almost an indicator that a school could be friendly on the transfer side?
Yeah, but there are also some schools that are just committed to transfer as an ethical approach. A lot of public universities set aside space in their upper division classes for transfer students. The University of California, the entire University of California system does that. They're completely committed to transfers. They prioritize California community college students and they save space for them. And they give out scholarships to them. That's one approach. But there are also some surprising schools in the selective areas that accept a large number of transfer students. And they're often trying to fill spaces for students who are doing study abroad programs, or they're going off to do an internship or research or something. And so they're accounting for the students who, when they hit junior year, maybe doing something different. A couple that I would call out are like Boston University, NYU, Columbia, Cornell. They all take a high number of transfer students and are very forthcoming with information on the transferability of credits, but you certainly wouldn't think of them as having low retention rates.
Sure. But it's almost like they're being smart where, okay, if that student, we're still getting paid for them, but they're not filling that seat, okay, we can get a 2-for-1 deal on that chair.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a smart business decision, but that's great information. It's something I didn't think about.
It's also intriguing too, because prior to COVID, there was a growing trend, and I haven't seen it as much recently, and maybe just because I haven't had the students that were in this position, but there's been this deferred acceptance model that schools have been doing, which is, hey, you're in, but you can't come until second semester freshman year,
Right.
or you have to go to a satellite or go take this credit and then you're in. And I constantly go back to the business end of college because, as we have unveiled to people, they are big business. They just are.
True.
There's lots of money. There's lots of paychecks and payrolls and operational expenses that exist. And it seems like if you really get to the bottom line of it, you can understand, as you were just putting it, like, hey, if we save that seat, we know we'll fill that seat. And arguably, it could cost us less to fill that seat in a year or in a 2-year window. I don't really have a question there, just rambling thoughts.
Yeah. No, I hear that. I do think there are some very smart colleges out there who are planning for all of those different things and making sure that all of their dorm beds are going to be full, you know? But I will say I have had a number of students from those deferred programs come back to me and want to transfer afterwards. That January start can be rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to integrate into a community. So when I'm advising transfer students, I say, yes, there may be schools that will take you in January. Think really hard about whether or not that's a good idea for you, because it's so much easier to enter in the fall when there are, all the fairs and everybody's being welcomed and the freshmen are coming in and the transfers can be new and learning the ropes too. Starting in January is rough. So I've had a number of students try that, dislike it. It's part of deferred enrollment. And then at the end of that first semester, that January, spring, they'll then be applying for transfer to a totally different university.
On that same note, right, the idea that you're going to show up on campus and sort of get thrown into the mix. We talk a lot about the social, academic, and financial fit. That's what we're trying to target. And I think even if it was the right social fit as a first semester freshman, it could just not work at that point because of clickiness or because of whatever reason. But just going, I think that is a tall order. There's something else that I think is intriguing that you brought up, which is like Columbia and Cornell, and this idea that there's an awful lot of students that apply and are really close. They probably should have gotten in, but they don't. And if they get a second application or a transfer application, like there's an indicator there that a school's like, this person is committed. They want to be here. It's what they're trying to do. They went to this school. They got great grades and they're coming now. Again, there's another smart business model there, which is to see just how committed some of those borderline students might be.
Right.
Yeah. Obviously, one of the big questions I have coming into today was transferring in general. We try to help families, again, find that school, put in the time, put in the effort, the research that you're going to go to a school that you start at is where you're going to finish. But what do you see as, is there a main reason? Are there really some indicators that why students end up transferring? Is it the social fit? Is it there's not a social? Is it the academic fit wasn't right? This school's too expensive? What do you see as far as some of the top reasons that, I don't want to say they're mistakes, but essentially, what are the reasons that people say, this might not have been the right choice?
Yeah. So first of all, in the transfer world, I see about a 50-50 split between students who were planning from the start going to community college and planning for transfer. And then the other half are the ones who get to a 4-year and then for whatever reason, it's not right. Probably among those 4-year students, I see that a lot of them struggled that first year. That transition from high school to college was rough. I see a lot of students who had IEPs in high school and didn't go to the disability resource office at their new university. They're like, I'm just gonna do it. This is college. I'm gonna do it on my own. I don't need the resources anymore. Yeah, they probably did, So a lot of students come to me because they've struggled academically. Maybe the college has even said, hey, you need to go to a community college and revamp your transcript and then reapply or go elsewhere. So I think that's probably the number one reason that I see. But I have also seen some financial choices where students are at a really expensive school. I had one kid come to me and I had helped him for that first year. And he he said, I don't love this school enough to make my parents pay this amount. I want to transfer to an in-state public because that would be more financially responsible. He was just like, it's fine. I like it well enough, but it's so expensive and I'm not so in love that it's really worth it. Those are some common reasons. The social reasons are hard because how do you know the social fit at the next school is going to be any better? Sometimes you don't really know how you'll fit socially until you're there. So with those students, I often ask, have you tried these other things? Have you tried joining clubs? Have you tried asking for a different roommate or switching rooms? Sometimes things like that can make a huge difference. And the bonus there is if you're out joining clubs and getting involved on campus, maybe you find you're integrated into the community and you like it better and want to stay. If not, then you've got extracurriculars to put on your transfer application. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, interesting.
Does the application process change? You just brought up the fact that going to some clubs and extracurriculars, right? People put a heavy weight on that stuff in high school. And again, I think they get it wrong, but we can talk about that in a different subject. Depth, not breadth of activities is what is important. Is it going to be detrimental to a student if they don't engage on the campus that they're at in the transfer environment that they're going into?
It's a great question. And the extracurriculars aren't weighted as heavily usually in the transfer process. But still, if you're saying, I want to transfer, I don't like this current school, but then you have no evidence of attempting to make the most of that school, that can't be a red flag. Is the next university wondering, is he just going to get here and also be unhappy and also not get involved? Is it the wrong fit? The school's not the right match? Or is it the student who's not doing what they need to do to be integrated to the community? Definitely good to be getting involved on campus, but it's not as big a factor, I would say, as it is in first year admissions. And probably the other thing to weigh is when you're a transfer student, you are almost always applying directly to a major. It's very rare to be able to apply like undecided as a transfer student. You're usually having to show that you've prepared for a particular major because you're going in as a sophomore or a junior. You're supposed to be a little bit more aware of what you want to do. So that's sometimes where extracurriculars can be especially helpful, or having a job or volunteer work that's related to your major so that you can show you're not only academically prepared, but you really do know that's the major you want to do.
From a timeline perspective, obviously a high school senior, you kind of know what your timeline is, right? You know, when you're working on your essay, when you're building that college list, you're doing your visits, you get the apps in, financial aid, you get your acceptances, you got to make a decision by May 1st. How different is the timeline when you're a transfer, whether it's community college, or what does the timeline look like? When are you building that school list? When are you actually filling out? Are the deadlines very different? Catching up to speed on how different that world is.
Yeah, the deadlines are all over the map. It's wild. I've seen everything from talking about fall transfer deadlines. I've seen everything from like a November deadline for the next fall to like an August deadline a few weeks before the semester would start. So they're kind of all over the map. For those early deadlines, that tends to be the public universities that are really tapping the community college students, because that is a little bit more like the high school process where you're planning, you need to be taking the right classes, you're aiming for something. You've got a whole timeline planned out and a goal to complete certain classes by a certain date. The privates and schools that are maybe not as, not as worried about the influx of applications, they might have February and March deadlines. That's a really common time frame. So I see a lot of students over like winter break working on transfer applications to be prepared for February and March deadlines. But then it gets really tricky because your decisions start coming out in April, May, June, and the deadline to commit is not always a set date. It might be, let us know within 2 weeks. You have 1 month to decide. And a student might have a decision from one university and not from another and have to make the call. So I've had students who are committing to one school, putting down a deposit, but still hoping to hear from another school. And then they might lose their deposit to accept an offer at another school. So it can be really tricky in that way. And there is some time loss and sometimes some loss of money trying to just make sure that you've got a space you'll be happy with while waiting for the dream to come through.
Would there be any downside to potentially, if you did commit to that school early, that might eliminate the acceptance that you may have gotten? Could a school find out and then all of a sudden say, we just saw you committed over there. Why are we going to send you an acceptance?
That's always possible. I have not seen that typically. I think the schools are kind of aware that they are not all on the same time frame. So I've actually had students reach out to the admissions office and just say, I'm not ready to commit yet. Can I have an extension? Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. I've had students reach out to the university that hasn't given them a decision yet and say, when can I expect the decision? I have this offer in hand, but I really want to know what you're going to offer before I decide. And sometimes they can say, oh yeah, we'll get this to you soon. Or sometimes they're like, yeah, too bad, so so sad. Good luck. It's kind of all over the place. There's no firm rule with any of that. And it's just, you're gambling. You're trying to figure out what's going to be your best path and hope it all works out in the end.
I think that communication can be key too. Obviously, ask those questions. Don't just assume, oh, I didn't get something. Let me go to the school and ask. I would say that from those conversations, how willing is the school to actually try and help you? Is if they're saying, hey, so sad, nope, we can't do anything, too bad. Is that really somewhere you want to be? Like, I mean, just having that conversation might change your view when I really want to go here, but then they're not willing to do anything to help you in your process. Maybe all of a sudden that's not the right fit. Whereas you get a school, yeah, look, we'll give you another week, no problem. And okay, they obviously want me. So I think have those conversations. Don't just assume that college people, that they're real people. They're willing to talk. I think that what I just got from that was like, have those conversations, reach out and see what they're willing to do. Because if they say, yeah, nope, okay, thanks. Now I'm no longer interested. You just made my decision a little bit easier is where I would
That's certainly my opinion, but I will say it's some of the more selective big names who tend to have that attitude. So for some students, nothing will deter them,
Gotcha.
So I want to dig into the community college environment because we get a lot of questions on it. And I endorse people going for 4-year degrees. I endorse people getting educated, but I realize that there are different pathways and you need to approach it intelligently. Let's start with the basic, I am going to go community college pathway, and I'm doing it for justified reasons. What should that student and that family pay attention to as they go through that process with the intention of going to a 4-year?
Starts from looking at the community colleges. Depending on where you live, you might only have one option. There may only be one community college nearby, and that's where you go. In highly populated areas, you can have your choice of multiple community colleges, and you can see what do they offer, what are their special programs. I always like to look for the honors programs. I love community college honors programs, Phi Theta Kappa, or sometimes your own homegrown honors program. They often offer specialized classes. They could have professors who are really engaged and interested in teaching, maybe smaller class sizes, maybe dedicated advisors helping you on the transfer path. Sometimes those things come with preferred reading of transfer applications at the 4 years. So there are all kinds of perks. The honors programs are probably my favorite thing to look for. If you have access to that at a community college, go for it, because that just adds so much value to the community college. Beyond that, you're just looking for who has the kinds of classes that you're interested in, who maybe has transfer articulation agreements or maybe even transfer guarantees with local universities. They tend to be in-state situations where community colleges in a state will have agreements with public 4 years, also sometimes private 4 years in the general area or within the state, so that there's a list of classes. If you take these classes and get this GPA, you have a guaranteed spot at your university nearby. And so if you already know that's the end goal and you're either looking to save money or you weren't as strong a candidate right out of high school, but you know that you can change that through community college, look for the community colleges that have the agreements with the schools that you're interested in, because that can be such a great pathway. Then when you're there, it's really important that you get all the information on what's going to be needed for transfer. When you have those agreements in place, it can be pretty easy. You have to find that information. But if you're just going to community college and you're not sure where you're going to land, or you're looking at a school that's not part of an existing agreement in your state, then it requires more research. So you need to go to your community college transfer advisor. You need to call the universities that are interesting to you and ask to speak to their advisors. And a lot of students don't realize that they can actually do that. They can reach out to those 4-year universities and ask for help. Some of those 4-year universities send representatives to the community college. I know there was a community college in Massachusetts that sent a representative from UMass Amherst to sit in the cafeteria one day a week for lunch every single week. And she sat there with a sign, and anybody who was interested could come and sit down with her and ask questions about what to do next. It was amazing. You got to find all the information, and that means sometimes knowing what questions to ask, and it's not always obvious. That's where the book comes in. At least you know what you might need to ask.
Yeah, there's a huge component that we've talked about in the past, which is this idea of self-advocacy, right? To put it simply to the community college student, parents are sort of out of the picture now. Now it's on you. The high school really ties the parents into the process, and there's this whole thing you have to do, right? When you get to that community college level, there's not communication going to the parents. There is not that backup plan. So you really have to reach out. And the biggest piece of advice we give all students is just ask questions, right? It's okay not to know. It's not okay to not know and not ask, right? That's where you get into your problem because you make assumption, and we all know what assumption leads to, right? So the idea behind it is there are counselors at every school that's job is to get you to the next spot. Maybe that is employed. Maybe that is the next college. Maybe that is the next class. But if you just go through it and never touch the walls and never talk to people, you're going to miss out on the single biggest thing that you gain in higher education, which is mentorship, right? And mentors are the ones that sort of lubricate the system for you. And they can be the ones that write your recommendation letters. They can be the ones to tell you the next step. They may even be the ones that are visiting professors at the university you want to go to that cross over and train classes at the community college.
Yeah, so true. I think that's such a great point too. When people are asking about the quality of a community college, I think a lot of people don't realize that full-time professorships are very hard to come by. And so often your teacher at the community college is also teaching at the state school down the road, and then once a week at the university that's 2 hours away, because they're piecing together a full-time job from multiple part-time class options. So yeah, looking at that and building relationships with those folks, you never know what that can lead to. That can be an amazing mentorship. I talk about reaching out to your transfer advisors at the community college, but also go to office hours and get to know the professors. They may or may not know which class you should take next, but they can definitely write your recommendation letter, and they may have knowledge of the university that you're hoping to transfer to. So worth building those relationships for sure.
Yeah. All right, now let's get into the tough part of this conversation, which is the stigma of community college. Right. So I've always seen it as you have two people that end up in community college. The first is the one that is dedicated to try and get to the next level, but for whatever reason, they cannot enter a 4-year. Maybe they're taking care of a sick loved one. They need to be home to care for siblings. They can't afford it, whatever it may be. And then you have the ones that didn't perform, that end up in that direction. And I feel like there's a stigma that the bottom of the class goes to the community college and people are better than that. How do we overcome that? And does it still reign true from what you see?
Yeah, it's rough. That stigma is still out there. There was a poll that NACAC did a couple of years ago asking high school counselors about the stigma. Who's got the stigma? Who's perpetuating the stigma? It's parents. It's not teachers. It's not administrators. It's not folks at the universities that will be accepting community college students. And to some extent, it's the students, but the biggest stigma lies with the parents. It's the parents who say, oh no, my child's too good for that. And then that feeds to the child who now thinks, oh no, I'm too good for that. I have to do better than that. And then they're looking down on their classmates who are choosing community college. I think that's the real root of things. And I've been trying to talk to people about the stigma and where it actually comes from. Because if we go back in history, community colleges were not originally designed for this sort of open access, like path to higher ed that we see now. They were actually designed to, as I like to say, divert the riffraff. They were created back in the late 1800s as part of the Morrill Land Grant Act, because the second one required universities to basically be non-discriminatory in their admissions practices, or offer another pathway, offer another option for the riffraff, the people of color, the women, the whoever they didn't want to let into their elite university. That's the origin of a lot of community colleges. It was designed as a place to send the people they didn't want in the elite colleges. And so that's a really difficult stigma to overcome. It's in the founding of a lot of our community colleges. So we have to realize that is old racism in there, and we don't want to perpetuate that. I think anybody who realizes that this was designed to be racist and exclusionary, you can say, okay, whoa, I don't want to perpetuate that stigma. So knowing that, I hope people can go forward, look at community colleges with fresh eyes and see the job that they're doing today, which is incredible. They've got career and technical programs. They're giving out associate's degrees. They're training people to be vet techs and dental hygienists. They're preparing people to go off to 4-year universities. They do so many incredible things in our communities, and they don't get enough credit for it. And then coming back to the professors, yeah, a lot of your community college professors are the same people teaching at the 4-year university. So do you want to pay the 4-year university, or do you want to take that class at the inexpensive community college price? You're going to get the same class when it's the same professor, and the community college class is probably going to be a lot smaller and a more intimate setting. My husband and I both went to a big public research university. We went to UC Berkeley. Our intro intro classes as first years were, like 500 students. My daughter, who went to our community college locally, she never had a class with more than 30 students. And ultimately, she was in the California system, so everything was aligned. The UC had said those classes you take at the community college, we deem equivalent. So she got the same education for a much lower price and with more personal relationships with her professors and classmates. So I think when we start looking at the value and people are talking about return on investment, look at all you get from a community college for such a low price. And it's kind of incredible. You just have to know how to harness it, and you have to be asking the questions so that you get to your ultimate goal.
So I had 2 different separate semesters in my college journey. This is a while ago, but there were 2 very different. One was after my first year, I was transferring and I got accepted to a spring semester. And so I took fall courses at the local community college. And then a couple years later, transferred again. But at that point, I was working full time and was taking courses at night. And I don't know if it's still that way today. It was almost like 2 different schools. And what I mean by that is there was definitely a stigma, but I can say that when I went to class day 1, when I would go as a typical calendar, by the end of that semester, more than half the students were no longer showing up to class. Whereas my classes at night, I had 2 professors that were teaching at Drexel, the same course, the same book, and they came out and told me, like, you guys are making the best decision here. And the class was mostly working adults. And it was a different environment, like surrounding myself with people that wanted to be there versus the people that it felt like they had to be there. Yeah. So I'm just curious, do you see anything that's still like my experience is kind of something that's pretty standard across the board with that?
I don't know if I would call it standard, but I do think it's familiar. There are different reasons that people go to community college. And I've certainly seen the ones where they didn't get into the 4-year university and the parents are like, you have to go to college. So I guess you're going to the community college, make the best of it. But the student's not really committed. Maybe that's not what they want. Maybe they want to go into the workforce. So they're not showing up. They're not working hard. They're dropping out. Yeah, those students exist. But I think we see more of the students who are really committed, and they're either trying really hard to get the grades so that they can transfer to the best university, or they're the working adults who really need a degree to move forward in their careers. So they're committed. I think we see veterans coming out of the military and trying to figure out what they're going to do next. We see single moms who are now thinking, I don't want to just go get the minimum wage job. I need something better for my family. So I'm going to commit to community college and get a degree. I think we probably see more of that, but certainly the students who aren't really taking it seriously, yeah, they're there, they exist, but are they not at the 4-year colleges? I would argue they're still there. Those kinds of students still show up to the 4-year university too. The parent says, great, you worked hard. We've been writing you for 4 years of high school. Now you're at the 4-year. Parents can't keep tabs on you as easily. And so now they've got this taste of freedom. Those are a lot of the students that come back to me looking to transfer because they've failed out of their 4-year,
Yeah. So let's talk about credits and how they transfer and the sort of complexity there. Number one, how easy is it to transfer credits from 4-year to 4-year, from 2-year to 4-year? And what does the standard potential transferee need to understand?
Yeah. You are within that closed system, the state system, where the community college and the 4-year are in the same system. They probably have a transfer articulation agreement, which is essentially a list of courses that they have decided, yes, these are the same courses. These are equivalent. Some states have gone so far as to create common course numbering. That's happening in Florida. It's on the move in California. They've just started releasing some of their common course numbers now. You know that if you take these classes, they are exactly the same as what would be at the university. So you know they're going to transfer. You know they'll fulfill gen ed requirements. Outside of that, it's a little bit tricky. And there are some tools you can use. Transferology is a great tool. It's free on the web. You enter in all the classes you've taken at your school, and then you search for matches. And it will reveal from their vast database classes like yours that have previously transferred to those universities. So it's just a historical record of what has transferred in the past. And you can use that as an estimate of what's likely to transfer in the future. So putting all your classes in there, and you can put in your AP scores as well and do this whole search to see where your classes are going to align because those same classes have transferred in before. Some universities have a database on their own website. They may not share their data with Transferology, but they have their own database. And so if you just search for the name of a university and transfer equivalency database or transfer credit guide or something like that, you'll often find that they have a database where you can look up the same information historically, what classes from your your school have transferred to that school. And there's no guarantee that it will be the same. Times change, but it's a pretty good way of estimating. You just have to be aware that if your class doesn't show up, it does not mean your class won't transfer. It just means no one has tried to transfer that class before. You're going to be the pioneer. You're going to have to show that school what you did so they can decide if it's transferable. And if you really want to know it in advance, then that's a great situation to reach out to the university and say, hey, I see in the database these classes transfer. I didn't find these other classes. Can you tell me more about what that might look like, if they might be transferable, if they're likely to fulfill these requirements? And the ones that really go the extra mile, the universities that are really forthcoming, they'll show not just equivalencies and yes, we'll accept that credit, but they'll actually show how it applies to a degree in a particular major. And those are fantastic. If you can get a whole degree audit with the classes you're transferring in, so you know what's left and how long it will take you, I mean, that's fantastic for planning. So you got to be looking for those kinds of things. And if they don't exist, then you ask yourself, are you willing to take the risk? Is it worth it?
What's that process like if I have a credit that's not on the list and is it like an application for a credit to apply? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes the schools will just look at it and they'll be like, oh, this was psychology 101. Duh, it's psychology 101. And they'll just mark it as like equivalent. Sometimes if it's a more unique kind of class, they'll come back to the student and they'll ask for more information. Usually that more information is in the form of a syllabus. So if I could tell students any one thing, it is save your syllabus for every single class. Please put them somewhere. You never know when you're going to need them. I've had students not be able to get credit because they cannot put their hands on a syllabus, and it's devastating. You did the work, but you can't prove what was actually involved in your class, and so you don't get credit. So the schools will come back and say, give us a syllabus, give us the name of the textbook you used, tell us what was covered or what kind of assignment did you do? Do you have a paper that you saved from that class? And the student compiles whatever information they have, number one syllabus, maybe some other stuff, and sends it to the school. And then the school will process that and they'll take a look at their classes and see if they can find a class that aligns. That's also, though, where students can help themselves. If they go to the course catalog of that new school and locate a class that sounds like the one they took, they can often be more successful just by pointing out to the registrar, hey, I found this class in your catalog that sounds just like the one I did. Here's my syllabus. Here's this course description from my old school. Can you take a look and see if it's equivalent to this other class I've identified? And sometimes if you smooth the pathway, then it's an easy yes.
That's advice for life right there.
Oh yeah.
I can show you the way and I can show you the reason, then the decision becomes easier.
Yeah. So my last question today is, maybe you have experience with this, maybe you don't, but you mentioned like the transfer counselors at a community college. Obviously, I think that is a resource that needs to be utilized.
Yes.
But if you're at the traditional four-year school, how much help is there when you go to a counselor and say, I want to leave? That's not the typical pathway. So do you really get assistance, or do you have to go to the school you may want to be transferring to and get help from there? What's that process like for those families and students?
Yeah, you're totally right. If you're at a four-year and you want to leave, those counselors are not trained and not encouraged to help you transfer out of their institution. There are a few rare exceptions, but that's usually not something that they have expertise in, and the school wouldn't want them to have that expertise. They want to keep you there. That's their goal. Like you said, it's a business, right? They want to keep you at their school. So yeah, it does mean reaching out to someone else, reaching out to an independent consultant, reaching out to the universities that you're interested in. You have to do a little more legwork to get your questions answered.
Yeah, that seems like the more difficult path. But again, as you always say, if there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yes.
Just find the people that can actually be of help. Use the interweb.
Yeah. How did people do this before the internet? I don't even know. It was,
Any big mistakes in any of the things we've talked about that would be like a PSA to all people listening?
Besides, save your syllabus.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I want that one on a flashing neon sign. Come on, people. I tell all my first years too. I also work with first year applicants and I say, save your syllabus. You never know.
Yep.
But beyond that, watch that transfer credit report when it comes through or when you're searching the databases, and look out for the things that are not aligned to a specific class, but are transferring in as an elective, and ask more about what that means. Because if you're not getting an equivalent class, if you're not getting credit for this specific class at that four-year university where you can go look up gen ed requirements and see, okay, that class fulfills this requirement, check. If you don't have that level of information, if it's just we're taking the credits, but we're not telling you how they apply, or they're just electives or whatever, you need to ask more questions, because you don't need that many electives to get a degree. So if you're coming in with 60 units and they're going to say 50 are electives, that is definitely definitely going to extend your time to a degree.
Mhm.
And you need to ask some very pointed questions about how that will work. Even if they're electives, do they fulfill gen ed requirements? Are they electives now, but I could appeal and try to get equivalency so that these apply to my major? Or is this just you're giving me a massive credit, but then I'm going to show up and you're going to give me a whole list of classes I have to take. And now I'm here for another 4 years. I'm essentially
Mhm.
starting over. You got to ask what it means when it's elective credit.
Great. Absolutely great stuff.
Yeah. Awesome
So
insight.
many, I mean, golden nugget takeaways today. The two big ones, the ability to appeal the transcript, that is one I think can be huge, but the bigger piece with all of it is what you just mentioned. If I'm going to have credits to transfer, what does that do to my degree timeline? Like that aspect of it, it's not just transferring, but what is my pathway to that degree is huge for anybody that's going to be transferring. That's the goal, right? It's not just accept these credits. It's I don't want to extend my time. So having that conversation, and for parents and students that are in this transfer world, that is, I think, the key takeaway today is to know the timeline of how much longer am I going to be here and
Right.
try get that information before you make any decisions. This was a wonderful conversation. So I enjoyed it thoroughly. I learned a lot today. Thank you. And Jamie, if there are, you mentioned you sometimes do have to go the independent route. Is that something you do? If this is something that people need to find, where can they find you?
Yeah. My website is transfersavvy.com. And I have a lot of free resources there. There are some worksheets that go with the book that you can download there. And I maintain a list of universities and their transfer acceptance rates compared to their first year acceptance rates, because it's not always easy to find those things. So
Yeah.
some free info for folks who are looking to transfer.
Perfect.
Great stuff.
Transfersavvy.com.
Yeah.
Jamie, thank you so much for your time. This has been an awesome episode.
Thank you so much.
This was great. And thanks for listening. And Jamie, thank you for being here. Until next time, take care, stay safe, stay sane, and stay strong.